And now to the latest on the coronavirus. The United States is reporting the highest number of deaths in a single day, nearly 1,500.
What used to be routine, what was it, 4 or 5 months ago, going to work or school, seeing friends, even grocery shopping, has changed so much during this pandemic.
Experts are warning about a looming mental health crisis in the United States, resulting from the national lockdown and fears pertaining to the pandemic.
Turning now to the economy, a new report out today estimates that in the first quarter this year, the GDP shrank by 4.8%. That's the largest decline in the economy since the Great Recession in 2008.
Well, that last song, I have to confess, that's one of those songs, you know, Kelsey's calling on us to sing, and I want to sing it, but at the same time, I'm praying, God, help me believe it. Help me believe your love is good always, and you're not letting go. Because sometimes it's not easy to believe that, is it, church? It's easier to sing that, it's easier to say that than it is to believe that. Well, today, I want to give you what God's given to me. You remember when Peter said to the man who was lame, "Silver and gold have I none, but what I have, I give to you." You can't give people what you don't have. And so today I want to give you what I have. It's going to be simple. I know there have been times when we've had unexpected company come over and they've stayed a little longer than expected, and meal time starts rolling around, and you know, you start whispering things back and forth to one another like, we don't have a lot of food in the house. What are we going to do? You know, what are we going to fix? And so what ends up happening is, you know, Denise is in the kitchen and she's peeling potatoes and trying to figure out what she's going to do with those. And you end up and you've got some grilled cheese sandwiches and some potatoes, and there's usually some bacon somewhere in the mix, which makes everything okay. And you know, just kind of a mixture of things. And this is what you say. You know, we don't have what we would like to have. It's not going to be steaks for everybody. We don't have what we'd like to have, but at least everybody's going to have something to eat. We're going to cook what we have. How many of you have experienced moments like that? My grandma, she was incredibly honest, and she was really blunt, and the older she got, the worse that got. By the way, I'm looking forward to being old enough to say whatever I want to say without caring what anybody thinks. Can anybody say amen to that? Well, my grandma and my papa, they had company come over one day, and they got there as family they hadn't seen in years, and they got there about mid-morning, and it was unexpected. They came up on the porch, and so they talked for a while, and they were still there at lunchtime. So my grandma, she goes in the kitchen, and she tries to find something, and she fixes something, and she was one of those great cooking Southern grandmas, and so somehow she could cook something out of thin air. But she cooks something for lunch, and they eat. And my grandma, you know, talks a little longer, and she kind of gives them the, well, it's been good to see y'all. Thank y'all for coming. You know, just so good to see you. It's been so long. And they just didn't get it. And so come dinner time, they were still there. So my grandma goes back in the kitchen, and she finds something, and she cooks again for everybody, and everybody eats. And after dinner, she gives them, you know, it's been good to see you. We haven't talked this long in years. Hope y'all have a great trip back home. And they didn't get the hint. So about 9 o'clock that night, they were still there. And they got the hint when my grandma looked at my papa and she said, Joe, let's go on to bed so these people can go home. Well, sometimes, we look into God's word and we're exhausted, tired, frustrated, struggling, empty, searching. Anybody ever been there? Anybody ever been there? Seems like all the words fall off the pages and there's page after page of just blank pages where there's supposed to be writing. Well, there's one of two things you can do in a moment like that as a pastor, because Sunday is coming. You can steal a sermon from somewhere, which I've never felt comfortable doing, and by God's grace, I'm not going to do. You can reach back through the catalog and pull out something that went pretty well once upon a time. Or you can just say to people what God said to you. And that's the option that I believe I'm supposed to take today. There's so many ripple effects connected to this virus. The fact that it's in what possibly has been one of the greatest times of racial tension in our lifetimes, and political tension so thick you could cut it out of the air with a knife, and fears causing tension, doubts are causing tension, disagreements of various kinds are causing tension. Almost everything and everywhere has become toxic. All the way from family get-togethers to social media. There's all these ripple effects. And the one that I'm going to be talking about today, I believe, to a large degree, is the result of so many of the others. Because one ripple effect causes another, causes another, causes another. That's what we're experiencing. And the ripple effect we're going to be talking about today is when you get to the place you're just drained. Because that is certainly what we're living through right now. 1 Kings chapter 19, if you have your Bibles. 1 Kings chapter 19. We're going to focus on verses 1 through 7. These verses give us a look into Elijah's life after his monumental experience on Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel's a lot more appealing. It's a lot easier to talk about what happened on Mount Carmel. I mean, it's really easy to preach when you have a line like, and the fire of God fell. I mean, that's powerful. The fire of God fell. Ooh, that's big. The fire of God fell. It's been used for longer than any of us have even begun to be alive. On Mount Carmel, Elijah's faith was strong. His courage was great. His prayer was effective. His message was bold. The outcome was incredible. But even for Elijah, that moment wasn't going to last forever. His entire ministry wasn't going to be moments like those he experienced on Mount Carmel. It just wasn't going to be true. It wouldn't be reality. Now, he looked invincible on Mount Carmel. How many of you would be intimidated by a prophet of God who could call fire down from heaven? Me. I'm going to be first in line. You can call fire down from heaven? Yes, Mr. Elijah. Whatever you want, Mr. Elijah. Anything I can do for you, sir. Anything I can help with. Anything I can do to make things right between me and you. I don't want there to be any animosity between us. You can call down fire from heaven. He looked invincible on Mount Carmel. But that didn't last forever. And I love that the Bible shares the glory of the mountain. But I love even more that in total transparency, it shares the gloom of the valley. We are great at erasing the dark moments and highlighting the bright moments. Erasing the weak moments and highlighting the strong moments. We even pretend to be other people when we are with people that we say we're close to. Because being transparent, well, that's difficult. But in total transparency, the Bible continues after Mount Carmel and allows us to see what follows. Now, this is what I haven't been able to get away from. This may not be big to you, but this week, it's just something that God's made big in my heart and life. Chapter 18 ends with, in the verse, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. The hand of the Lord was on Elijah. What else do you need? The hand of the Lord was on Elijah. Everything's going to be great. The hand of the Lord is on Elijah. That's what people pray for. That's what people ask for. That's what people say they long for. I want the hand of God on my life. The hand of God was on Elijah. But chapter 19 begins with Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Ahab was a weak, sinful king. As a matter of fact, if you search in Scripture and you read the introduction that we have to Ahab, he was more wicked than those who preceded him. He was wicked, but he was weak. And because he was weak, he married a wicked wife who was strong. She was against God. She was manipulative. She was heartless. She was consumed with power. Husbands, don't look at your wife. Whatever you do, look at me. She was manipulative. She was heartless. She was consumed with power. That was Jezebel. Ahab was called king. But Jezebel held the authority. And that's why Ahab did nothing on Mount Carmel. Nothing. He didn't deal with Elijah in any way, shape, form, or fashion. He did nothing. Instead, he ran to Jezebel just as quickly as he could, knowing that in her anger, she would deal with Elijah in a way that would make him look strong. His tantrums and her tendency for vengeance was a horrible combination. So Ahab told her how that Elijah had gathered Israel together and demanded that they choose God or Baal. You have to choose one or the other. You can't halt or stay between two opinions. It can't be God and Baal. It has to be Either one. If you're going to worship God, you're going to worship God. If you're going to worship this false God, then you're going to worship this false God. But it can't be both. He told her about that. He told her how that he gathered the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah. He told her about that. And he told her how that Elijah prayed and fire came down from heaven and consumed the altar. And then Elijah, in the power of that moment, had the people gather up what I believe to be 850 prophets. There are some who say, no, they only killed 450, being the prophets of Baal. But in verse 1 of chapter 19, Ahab says they killed all the prophets. So personally, I believe there were 850 that were killed. I can't imagine. I think they were both about the same cause, which was leading Israel into idolatry. So I can't imagine while you're purifying that you wouldn't take care of all of it at once. But they killed the prophets, he says. He told Jezebel about that. Like a messenger running back to tell a king everything, Ahab ran to give Jezebel the story of recent events. And his plan worked. Chapter 19, verse 2. Then Jezebel, not Ahab, Jezebel, sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them, speaking of the prophets, by this time tomorrow. In other words, you have 24 hours from this moment and you are going to be, you're going to be dead. Now, instead of accepting that her gods were false, Jezebel doubled down and swore by the same gods who had failed. But what she's saying is this: by all that I believe to be divine, you are going to die. Elijah, you're done. You are on the clock. And you would expect the next phrase to read. Don't jump ahead. You would expect the next phrase to read. So Elijah sent a messenger back to her and said, you meet me on Mount Carmel, and we're going to call down more fire from heaven, and it's going to be you next. I mean, you would think he would have said, God will take care of you. But instead, chapter 19, verse 3. Then he was, what's the next word? Afraid. And he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. He's going it alone. He's going into isolation, into hiding. Even the one who would usually go with him as an apprentice, he leaves him behind. He's afraid. Running for his life. You wouldn't expect that, would you? But the reality in this is this, and don't miss it. There's a beauty in this. It shows that the power that was demonstrated on Mount Carmel was never Elijah's power. It wasn't him. It was God's power. Elijah was only human. God used him in a great way, but it wasn't his fire, it was God's. It wasn't his name that was at stake, it was God's. It wasn't Elijah's people, those were God's people. Elijah, he was only human. And that's why the message should never be, and that's why the message should have never been about the greatness of Elijah. Don't ever look into these texts and preach the greatness of the man. Always look in these texts and preach the greatness of the God. Because it's not about the man, it's about God. The message should have always been about the power of God. And just because the power of God accomplished something extraordinary through Elijah in a moment, it didn't mean that Elijah didn't still have all the issues of his humanity. He had all those issues. They didn't disappear. Just because the power of God accomplished something extraordinary didn't mean that Elijah wasn't human, with all of the faults and the flaws and the tendencies that came along with him being a human. He still had issues. He still had insecurities. He still had fears. He still had doubts. He still had depression. He still had, you just go down the list. By the way, I just want to say this, and I want you to hear it clearly. God never uses us because of our greatness. God always uses us because of his greatness. If God does anything great through your life, it's not that you're great, it's that he's great. God doesn't use us to increase our fame. God always uses us to increase his glory. God doesn't use us so that the fame of our name will spread. God uses us so that the fame of his name will spread. God was divine. Elijah was human. God was strong. Elijah was weak. God was capable. Elijah was incapable. God was consistent. Elijah was inconsistent. And that's proven in the next few verses. Chapter 19, verses 4 through 7. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now. O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." In other words, they died, and I'm no better than them. I know that I have an appointment with death. Just let it be now. He lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came to him a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." He went where he thought nobody could find him, the wilderness. By the way, when the Bible says wilderness in this text, it literally means wilderness. He went until he was exhausted. He couldn't go any farther. It wasn't that there was this one broom tree. This would have been a common tree in that area. He just went until he didn't feel like going any further, and he just sat down. And he prayed what was likely a dishonest prayer. "God, please let me die. Just let me die." Well, if you wanted to do that, all you needed to do was stay where you were. Jezebel was going to take care of that for you. You're running for a reason. By the way, how many of you have ever prayed dishonest prayers? Hey, can we just have a moment of praise? How many of you want to thank God for the prayers he didn't answer? Like you prayed like some really dumb prayers and he didn't answer them. You asked for some things. Had he given that to you, it would have been disastrous. thank God he doesn't answer our ignorant prayers. But he prays, God, please let me die. Instead of taking his life, the angel of the Lord ministered to him in his weakest moment and gave him exactly what he needed. When he thought he was hidden, no one could find him, God proved that he had been watching him all along. How many of you are glad that God's eyes are always on us? I used to love that song, and you know, just that one line, his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I mean, think about it. The God of the universe, you know, if he sees the sparrow, you know he sees you. Elijah thought, nobody can find me here. And God could say, I know exactly where you are. And he came to him and gave him what he needed. The God who was with him on the mountain is now with him in the wilderness. The God who was with him before the masses is now the God who was with him when he was all alone. And so, I love this. God was faithful to a man who was afraid. God was faithful to a man who was running. And can we just be encouraged by this? I don't know what you're going through during this season. I don't know the emotions you wrestle with. I don't know the doubts or the discouragements or the anger. I don't know what you're dealing with right now, but this is what I know. God's proven in his word that he's faithful to people who are afraid. He's faithful to people who are running. He's faithful to people who are doubting. He's faithful to people who are hiding. God is faithful. And so a few days ago, I was reading these verses and I just came across these verses in my reading. And God knew that I needed to read these words. God knew that I needed to hear of his faithfulness to a man who was afraid. He knew that I needed to hear the story of him pursuing a man who wanted to run away. He knew that I needed to hear the story of him caring for a man who was exhausted. And he knew that I needed this one phrase, and this is what I'm going to give to you. The journey is too great for you. Elijah, you can't make this journey on your own. Elijah, you can't do this by yourself. Elijah, you don't have the strength that is required. The journey is too great for you. Let me give you what you need for the road ahead. Elijah, you've reached the point of being completely drained. Let me restore you for the road ahead. And I think in that moment, I just really identified with that. God, I know what it's like when it seems as if the journey is too great for me. But then I realized that this wasn't just for me, this is for you. And I pray for you because I know that I'm not the only one who feels like the journey is too great. There are a lot of people in this room right now who are likely feeling like the journey is too great. The prayer request that we prayed over today, as they were read into our hearing, a lot of those people right now are feeling like the journey is too great for them. I think we all know what it feels like to be in desperate need of God's strength. People watching online right now, you know what it feels like to be in desperate need of God's strength. And I just feel like this season of COVID-19 has left people drained. I want to ask you to be completely, totally honest. How many people in the room right now you would describe the way you feel right now, what you're going through, all that you're dealing with, regardless of what the cause is, how many people in this room right now would say that you feel pretty drained? Would you raise your hand if that would be you? That's what I've been hearing. The other night, Jack arrived for our Wednesday night time in the Word that we're doing on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock on Facebook Live. And he sat down, and the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to be my best tonight. I'm just completely, totally exhausted." I'm hearing that from everybody. Had a pastor's wife say to Denise and I yesterday, and she's been trying to help her husband carry his burdens and be active at work in the church when crowds are way down and giving's way down and everything seems to be just going down the tubes after a lifetime of ministry. And this is what she said: "I'm just so exhausted." Parents who are trying to be faithful to help their kids get an education at home and feeling like that's failing. I've had so many parents say, "I just feel exhausted." And then I think due to the spiritual attack that is connected to this in the lives of so many people, I just feel drained. I just feel exhausted. That's where people are right now. It's true. It's unmistakable. You hear it in people's voices. You see it on people's faces. You feel it when you're where other people are. I read an article that was printed by a medical group called The Patient. This is what the article said. Not a Christian article, but so true. We feel tired when we are facing financial or health concerns. It also happens when we have to adapt to an unfamiliar way of doing things, such as life under lockdown. We're having to work out new ways of doing pretty much everything, from entertaining the kids, remote working, to socializing with friends. We're living through a period of increased anxiety over our health, vulnerable loved ones, finances, job security, with the future looking uncertain, and the public instructed to stay home. Many of us are feeling isolated and stressed. Anxiety, depression, and stress are exhausting by their nature. Anxiety feeds on uncertainty, and this is rife now. The what-ifs are endless, says Dr. Jilly Gibson Miller of the Department of Psychology at the University of Sheffield. Although this is a totally normal response to such a threatening situation, these conditions have a huge impact on the body and mind, people's ability to concentrate, their motivation, and their energy levels. I think in so many ways, so many people right now are just kind of under a broom tree. Just that feeling of giving up. People who are dealing with isolation. People who are hiding in the shadows. I just think that's where we are right now. The journey can be too great for us. I mean, it's exhausting living in fear about your job. It's exhausting being concerned about your 401k and your retirement being lost. It's exhausting just being in public and thinking about your proximity to other people and their proximity to you. I mean, yesterday, Denise and I went to a wedding, and it was a very small wedding, and they scaled back the crowd, and they had everybody far apart, and yet there was a couple of times there when there were social moments, and I realize that I'm backing away from people. That I'm subconsciously thinking about that. It's exhausting. It's exhausting when you're concerned about your future and your home and your well-being. It's exhausting trying to provide an education for your kids and teachers trying to teach virtually. It's exhausting. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And we aren't exempt from difficulty. There are times when we feel like running away. Right? There's times when we feel like we're out in the wilderness and we're just under a broom tree somewhere. But can I remind you that God knows exactly where we are, even when we don't know where we are. And I give you this and I'm finished. Psalm 23 verse 5. The psalmist said this: "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over." Now it begins with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." So how are we supposed to live when we're following this shepherd that says he'll supply our needs? How are we supposed to live? What's our survival plan in all of this? When we're drained and empty, what's our survival plan? Well, it's this: that we have a God. We have a shepherd who's already given us more than we deserve. That's what this table represents. You've already given me more than I deserve, more than I need. You give this to me in the presence of my enemies. My enemies are weighing down on me, and even while they are, you're supplying for me. You're taking care of me. You anoint my head with oil. By the way, this is a beautiful picture. This is what this literally means. You pour oil on my head so abundantly that it seems to be made fat with it. You restore me. This oil was what you gave to a distinguished guest. God, even in the worst of times, when my enemies are weighing down on me, you treat me in ways that I don't deserve. Then my cup runs over. The angel of the Lord came to Elijah and said, I'm going to give you what you need in a season when you don't have what you need. I'm going to be faithful in a season when you aren't being faithful, because the journey's too great for you. We have a shepherd who knows what we're going through. We have a shepherd who sees us in our pain, who sees us in our discouragement, who knows us in our despair, who knows when we're drained. We have this shepherd who can supply us with what we need to make it, even when we don't think we can. And so what's the answer for the person who's drained? It's turn to Jesus. Abide in Jesus. Trust Jesus. This one that died and rose again and saves the lost and sustains the Christian. He has the power to get us through whatever we're facing. And so this is what I'm praying. God, right now while I'm drained, right now while I'm empty, would you give me what I need to make it until I'm out of this wilderness? That's what I'm praying for you. Would you stand? You ever feel like your job's asking for more? and you just feel like screaming, I don't have more. That the people in your life are asking for more. And you feel like screaming, I don't have more. The question, can you? I mean, that's almost overwhelming. No, I can't. I can't pour into your life right now because my life is empty. Our dependence is on a God who's never drained, a God who's never empty, a God who's always able to supply. And I know this is a season when we're drained. I know it is. I see it on your faces. I know it is. I had somebody say to me the other day, you just look so exhausted, and I wanted to say, I am. I am. It's exhausting to know that hundreds of people are gone and you don't even know how to get in touch with. It's exhausting to try to lead during a time when you don't know what the outcome's going to be, and you're just having to trust God moment by moment. It's exhausting. You're exhausted. We're all drained. You know what that proves? The power's not ours. We're human on our best day. The power is God's. That's what we desperately need. That's the only way we're going to make it. I don't know if you need to come and pray today. If you do, you can. If you want to pray in your seat, you can. But let's just pray that we would have a Psalm 23 experience before this is over, and we would see him give us peace in the face of this enemy. That we would experience him supplying what we need and taking care of us emotionally, spiritually, relationally, physically during this time. Let's just trust him.
Flee and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home. Ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home.
Sing one more verse.
Oh, for the wonderful love he has promised, promised for you and for me. Though we have sinned, he has mercy and pardon, pardon for you and for me. Come home, come home. Ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling.